Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the New Mainstream Podcast,
where we explore the impact of multicultural consumers on marketing and media.
I'm your host, Mario Carrasco, and co-founder of Think Now. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the New Mainstream Podcast. I'm your host, Mario Carrasco. Today, we have a special guest joining us, Marcela Doria, Vice President of Insight for Warner Brothers Discovery, focusing on Latin America and U.S. Hispanic markets. Over 20 years of experience, Marcela, you've seen the media industry transform, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's my pleasure too to be able to talk to you a little, share a little bit of my experience for the past 20 years already.
Yeah, and really cool. I think you're our first guest to have both U.S. Hispanic and Latin experience. So really excited to talk about that. But before we dive into your work, I mean, you've had a impressive career. You had roles at Twitter, Warner, Turner, ESPN. When did your journey begin, and tell us how did you end up at Warner Brothers?
Well, okay, I tell you a little bit. So I've been working in the industry for the past 20 years. So I pretty much is the only thing that I did in my entire life. It was working for media. Basically, I'm a psychologist. No, my graduation. I'm a psychologist. I'm Brazilian. So I graduated in Brazil as a psychologist. And then while I was at university, I had the pleasure to be able to work in a like consumer institute, basically doing research for various brands. And then at the time, there was a lot of brands like TV brands like Cartoon, Discovery Networks, CNN. Lots of them they were like doing a lot of studies in Brazil because pay TV at that moment. This was back in 2001. Pay TV and that moment was like starting in Brazil. Now, it started before, but starting being measured in Brazil, and then they need to understand a little bit more the Brazilian consumer. I was lucky to be part of to work in the institute that had many clients. And then in 2001, they need a Brazilian, no, to come to Miami to help, and especially in the programming, understanding what the consumers likes, what type of shows and so after some interviews, I was the one selected by Discovery. So I work in Miami, which, by the way, I live in Miami. I'm back in Miami. I work in Miami from 2001 to 2007, and then in 2007, I went back to Brazil to be the head of research for Discovery Networks in Brazil, because at that moment, Brazil was uh, an official office of Discovery Networks, no, for the first time. This was 2007. And then I worked for 6 years, 5 years and a half. And then ESPN invited me to be the head of research for them. Excuse me. So and then I went to work at ESPN Brazil for 2.5 years, which was also awesome too, because uh, there was many things to do. And when looking sports, and then what happened with ESPN at the moment, they had three networks. One is ESPN Brazil and two other ESPN2 and ESPN Plus. And pretty much they want to understand how they could improve the audience and have like a better flow in the portfolio, like making the consumer stay longer in the channel. And we did a fantastic job. That was awesome. So at the moment that when I joined, the network was number 26 in the ranking. And then after a year, like going deep in the programming stuff, and then we jumped from 26 to 11, and it was very very cool. And then in 2008, 2015, Twitter also was like getting super super hot in Brazil, and Brazil was the headquarter of Twitter. No, today is X, so there's not Twitter anymore. But then I was invited to be the head of research for Latin America based in Brazil, and I was there for 4 years, which was very, very different and was very quite interesting, Mario, because I was a TV person. No, I had been working for like 15 years in TV, and then suddenly I had the opportunity to go digital, and I felt that this is my moment to go from analogic to digital and understanding another environment and even a startup type, because Twitter at the moment was a startup. I remember when I joined Twitter in 2015, every week they had the like new people entering the company, and it was like some in San Francisco, no, because every new employee they had to go to San Francisco for the first week, and it was like hundreds every week joined the company. It was incredible. And then at Twitter was very nice, but it was completely different. So I learned something that it was very, very different from TV, a new type of consumer, and the consumption also is. I'm not talking about content in a long form, but it's like the immediate consumption of like short forms. It was very, very cool. And then in 2018, 4 years, 3 years and a half, Turner at the moment need a vice president of research, as they call vice president of data and insight. And I joined Turner in 2018. And I wasn't a Turner until became Warner Media and then Warner Bros. Discovery now. So I've been in the company for 6 years. But I had many different experiences there too, because Turner at the moment, it was interesting because my boss, the president of Turner Latin America, he always found that the executives part of the board, they could do a double job, so double function. So everyone had like say in my case, I had research, but I had a media. I was from over a year. I was the head of media. I is a media hub at Turnham at the time. Warner Media. I also I was a GM of Brazil for a while too, because I was the only Brazilian part of the board for Latam. So while I was still in Brazil, not moved to US yet, so I was GM, and then I did innovation. So there was many things that we did as a team, and it was very interesting. And now I have a big whole role, which is uh, the inside team for WBD Latin America, including USH.
That's amazing, and I love that you have experience with analog, moving to digital at Twitter, and now you've seen media transform to streaming platforms and digital, right? So, um, I'm curious. Like, you're a psychologist. How has this movement over the past couple of decades, with almost everything now going to streaming and digital, including legacy media, how has this impacted the way you approach data analysis or customer insights? Has it changed for you, or has it stayed the same and you're just using new technology?
No, for me as a professional has changed because we need to adapt to the new technology. So we are much more looking like was as we call the first part data.
Mm.
Because if you think about like TV, especially when talking about pay TV, and even broadcasters, we don't have a direct relations with the consumer. No, it's a B2B2C relationship,
Mm.
because like who has the data that comes from that interaction is the distributors. No, so we never had before a way to connect with the consumer, uh, in a sense. And now with his streaming, we do have, as it is a digital native platform, no. So we do have that relationship. We do have the actual consumption. So it's quite different for the way that we approach, the way that you interpret it and you get the data. Before, like old times, the only way that I had is like doing research, or doing studies, or panels, and so today I do have access direct from the consumer. But what is interesting that in terms of consumption, the consumer is the same. It's just changed the platform. It's the same when we talk about like years ago, no, from radio to TV. No, it's just the way that people, the way that they access the content, no, what they like, has changed. But the consumer, in the sense, is the same, and I don't think the consumer can see the difference, no, They just say, I'm gonna watch TV, and TV could be Max, which is streaming, could be like TNT, CNN, or could be in the case of US, ABC. It is, everything is content, so they do not discriminate the platforms. They just like everything's fits in the same package, which is like, I'm gonna watch what I like, and that has not changed.
For sure, for sure. No, that's interesting. And do you? I mean, would you say it's better for you now, the same, or different? Like from an insights perspective.
For inside perspective, is I think is more interesting because
Mm,
I do have much more access to the consumer and different metadatas, as you call, and also like we have it is different. Is challenge as well, because there are many things there in the social media, for example. Like, just give an example of our portfolio, no, WBD. We get in almost 80% of the entire population Latin America, because we do have content everywhere. We have content in social media, we have websites, we have podcasts, we have games, we have theatrical. So we're not just in the environment of pay TV. So we are much
mm.
broader than that, because we explore our content everywhere. But in most of those cases, sometimes I have no way to accessing my consumer, because they are in platforms that I have no access. So it's challenging, because I need to find ways to identify my consumer. And I need to provide my content everywhere, but sometimes I will not have the immediate return of that consumption. No, is like, it's more challenging to capture some information that when it goes outside my environment.
That's interesting. Well, and to clarify, for the Warner Media properties, right? Because you have, like you mentioned, theatrical, podcast, social. Are you able to connect that consumer, or um, even within Warner Brothers Discovery, is it hard to connect all the different media platforms?
It's very difficult to connect all of them.
Mm,
We do some proxy. What do we do? Because each one of them, each one of these different platforms, they have a different KPI, and they have their own first part data. So um, there are several tools that help us. But then what you do, you get syndicated tools in each one of the touch points, and then make it like a try to normalize everything and do a proxy of what would be my size. As I said, there's 80% of the Latin Americans, as I mentioned, it comes from this analysis. No, how can I duplicate those that comes from social media, from my site, from theatrical, from linear, etc., and then I get the number. But yeah, you cannot connect everyone. It's very hard.
yeah, no, and I'm asking because we're on the other side, right? Trying to connect, and it's hard for us. So it's just interesting to hear that you have access to data, but you're still having those similar challenges as the market research companies are.
Ah, yeah, sure. Especially when you're talking about digital versus linear, no? Uh,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I depend on the syndication.
One of the things I'm most excited to talk about is getting into U.S. Hispanic and Latin America. Like I mentioned, I don't think we've had anyone that's had experience in both. And I know there's a lot of differences, but for people that maybe are not as savvy as you in the differences between U.S. Hispanic and Latin America, because I'm sure we both talk to people that think there's similarities or they're the same, and there are similarities, but really they're pretty different. So to you, what are some key differences if you had to summarize between U.S. Latinos and Latinos in Latin America?
Well, they are quite different. Um, I think I'm a Latino too, no? And I think you yourself, you are a Latino
Yeah.
as well. Uh, First of all, the Latino in US, they are they are completely different than Latino in Mexico, in Puerto Rico, in Colombia, and even in Brazil. No, where we don't speak Spanish, but we are Latinos in the end of the day, because we live a different reality. No,
Mm.
we have access to different things. We consume different products. We are in a different position, even like socially. No, uh, So I think it is a mistake when if you look at Mexican US is exactly the same as a Mexican Mexico, not at all. So and you can see these differences, no. Uh, First of all, there are many of them, the Latins, not all of them that just speak only English, Spanish. They most of speak English and Spanish. They watch content everywhere. They have access to American content in Spanish, they dubbed or even subtitle. So it's even sometimes we discuss here. We have a show that is like we put it in the Spanish content in Spanish channel, and we assume that they're gonna watch because in Spanish they are Latinos, but they are watching the same show in our like domestic network. And then sometimes we have a difference in the strategy of we have the release and the domestic, and then we have like a week after have the same premiere in the Spanish speaker channel, and doesn't work. Why? Because they are watching in domestic. So because we assume that they are living as they are in their countries, no, and you cannot assume
Right.
that they are completely different. Another thing that is interesting is when they watch content in Spanish content, they want to relate to it. They want to somehow to remember like their culture, no.
Is this U.S. Hispanics?
US Hispanic.
Yeah.
And it's funny because sometimes, okay, let's put it like, for example, if you're gonna dub a show, let's put it in the neutral is Spanish. They don't like it. They want to listen the Mexicans. They want to listen the Argentine. They want to listen,
Yeah.
they want to because it's like it's a way that I can connect again with my culture. So I think put all of them in the same package, it is complicated because the Latinos, we do have the majority are Mexicans, but you also have a lot of people from Colombia, Venezuela, from Puerto Rico, from Argentina. So we have many people from different nationalities that aren't just Mexican. So we need to watch out and make sure that we are talking to those every different culture.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. Latin America is incredibly diverse, right? Because Latinos in the U.S. are diverse, like you mentioned. They're mainly Mexican, but there's a lot of growth in Venezuelan, Salvadorian, Puerto Rican, right?
Yeah.
But within Latin America, it's diverse. Every country has its own culture. Yes, we share a language, but like you mentioned, Brazil is it doesn't speak Spanish, Portuguese. Um, I'm curious from the data you see, like what are some differences that you can point out in some of the Latin American countries in terms of of differences in how consumers in different Latin American countries are consuming content?
High level is like if you're talking about Brazilians, we do have a very very strong broadcast in Brazil that they are famous for their soap operas, and then they export a lot of Brazilian soap operas to the world, and so the Brazilians love soap opera, and they love their own soap opera. There's a little bit like um, difficulties when you have a content that is Spanish because they like or is Portuguese or is English. So uh, Brazil, they accept the content, but I think dubbing the content to Portuguese or having it in English is key because there's a little bit it's a little bit tricky if you have a Spanish uh, only.
Are there any like Mexican soap operas that are dubbed in Portuguese and that are is that popular?
Yes, they had Betty La Fea. It was
Oh,
dubbed and worked very, very well. And Betty La Fea works everywhere,
yeah,
always, but it worked very well in Brazil. So, and even Chisperito, like Chavo, works
yeah.
very well in Brazil and it was dubbed in Portuguese. So that is number one. Look, the local production, due to the broadcaster, is very strong. It's super, super, like is the content for the Brazilians, and soap opera is the and the top. This and then the dub being Portuguese or in English is important. And if you look at like Latin America, like we have Mexico, they have a lot of influence of US because like the proximity of with US. So the content in the US works very very well because they have a lot of familiarity with the content, no? like we do have Friends. So Friends is very, very popular in Mexico. No, everybody loves Friends. Everybody loves like DC content. I'm talking about Max. And then if you look on the other side, if you look Argentina, it's farther than US, has a lot of influence of Europeans. So
Mm.
there are many types of content that works very, very well for us. And sometimes content that we produce in Argentina is going to work very well in Europe, even.
Oh,
It's
that's
going to travel
interesting.
very well. They have this type of like, there is the political aspect of the content that goes well with the Argentine. They are like the Chilean peoples. They like the political topics. Everything relates to politics. And then if you look Colombia is a country that accepts all types of content. It's funny because like the content that we produce sometimes in Brazil and Argentina works very well in Colombia. The Mexican content also works very well in Colombia. So they accept all type of content. Um, we do have I don't know if it's part of reality of the Colombians, but the narco type works very well in Colombia, as works very well in Brazil as well. So
Mm.
then it has to do with the reality of the country, like unfortunately,
Yeah.
is close to what happens in the day by day. So works very well for us.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think it's so cool you have insight into that. Like I didn't know some of the nuances there about the different companies, countries, I should say. Um, so it's interesting. You get to see what succeeds and what fails in each country from a content perspective. I know it's a little bit different, but in your opinion, like thinking about marketing strategies, what are some common mistakes that you see in Latin American countries? Like, yeah, some common mistakes, I guess. So one example you just mentioned, for example, that Mexican soap operas don't necessarily work well in Brazil. It needs to be localized. Is there anything like that? Marketing takeaways that you could share with us from different Latin American countries?
I think like one of the things is hard. I think one mistake is like things that one thing fits all. It would
Mm.
be because I do believe that the communication and the way that each one of the countries relate to the content, and they the way that they watch the content is going to be different. So I my advice is we need to customize the narrative and the approach for each one of the markets. You
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
like and I have interesting things. For example, we test sometimes the communication strategy. So we have a content that is like, let's say a content that is more spicy, that has like more sex, and so the approach that you the way that you're going to communicate that to Mexicans is going to be different from the way that you're going to communicate for the Brazilians, right?
Mm.
Brazilians like accept more the we talk more about openly about sex. Mexicans are more traditional; they are more like reserved on that aspect. So if you're gonna talk about like how to say polyamor, I don't know how to say that in English.
Yeah. Polyamorous. Yeah.
Yes. So maybe the angle for Mexicans is more in the aspect of the love and how, and the Brazilians is more the spice of the sex. So
Right.
I think there is this kind of nuance that the way that you communicate has to fit with the culture of the specific country.
No, that's interesting, and you're pointing to values, right? And that's so key in what we do from a research perspective. What understanding, you know, what are the values, and how do you communicate certain type of content? Um, and so back a little bit to data and insights. Like you mentioned, right? Data is critical in understanding audiences. How do you leverage data analytics and consumer insights to inform the way that you deliver content? You just gave us an example about localizing something, with topics like spicier topics. Is there any other research insights you could share with us in terms of how you deliver content to specific Latin American countries or the US?
Like basically, most of what my team does in Latin America is we work together with the content strategy team,
Hmm.
and sometimes in the beginning testing some development, as I said. So let's say you have some production companies that come to us with projects. So we test, oh, this type of content makes sense. How much is going to travel? How attractive is this type of content? So testing, like I give an example right now, like from the development, testing the pre-production, and then also during the production, also sometimes we help to test, and even some episodes, no, how do people feel the pace of the episode? What about the talents? Is the right talent? No, the general evaluation of the content, and then after also also we do as we call postmortem. So I give an example. Just have Cidade de Deus, City of God, that is doing very very well in the platform. So this was a work together with the content strategy team where we help them testing um, some aspects of the content, no, even
Is that the show that's the new show on Max based off of the movie?
exactly that one.
Oh, I have to watch that because that was one of my favorite movies. That was
Yeah, it's
amazing.
doing very very well. It's doing very well. So it's an awesome content, and we work together with strategy team testing some some things. Even the title sometimes we have to test. It's not in this case because it was like no brainer. No, it's like
Yeah.
City of God. But then we work together and testing the production and even some prospects.
So I'm curious now. I have to ask you. I'm remembering one of my favorite shows that came out on Max was a Mexican show, Ugly. I don't
Ugly
know.
was really good.
How did that do? Was that popular? Did that do well?
Yes, they did very, very well. And it was funny because was interesting because Ugly came from insights together with the content team, said that this is the type of content that's gonna resonate very well with the Mexicans, no, about like the culture and the movement, the music movement of the moment. So
Yeah.
it and indeed went very well to us.
Did it work? So I'm a U.S. Latino. Did it do well in the U.S. and
US as
Mexico?
well. Yes, in
Really?
US too. That was the type of content that traveled very well. No.
That's cool. So is there going to be a season two? I haven't heard anything.
No, I'm not sure. I don't know.
I'm,
I have no information about it.
I'm putting my request in now.
Okay, I take notes. I'll let them know.
um, another thing I want to touch on outside is like collaboration. I'm imagine you're working with different countries, right? You're like you mentioned, you're working with the content team. So collaboration must be a key aspect. Um, yeah, how does your cross team collaboration enhance your abilities, or how are you using that? I mean, and I'm asking because a lot of our listeners are starting to have to manage multi-country teams, so would love to, maybe some tips on how to do that.
Well, collaboration is key for me. Of course, as you call my team, we are like team of support other teams. Our task is to give support to whatever they need in terms of insights. I do have a statement that I'm rethinking that statement, but I always say like, I have your answer. What's your question? This is like our statement. No, we're always gonna come with a answer to your question. No, if it A, Z, or B doesn't matter. So we are here to help. I think that for us, keys. I as I said, like I always gonna come to help in something. Sometimes it's not what you exactly expected, but we are here to work as a team, and this is number one. Listen a lot to my stakeholders, no, and work. I always say to my team, we need to get a good brief, which means that we need to understand why people, what type of problem we are solving, no, and collaboration. I think is part of it. No, when you go there and you listen to your stakeholders and you make sure that you're going to deliver what they want. It's not something that you just have in your drawer and just give it to them. No, we like let's work together. No, and I also make sure that my team is part of the other folks' teams. So We work as we look. I'm part of your team. I'm here to support you. No, there is no like my visibility versus your visibility. It doesn't matter. I think we are all one team. So this is the approach that we have in Latin America with the insights team here in WBD.
I love that. And here, believe it or not, we're almost at the end here. Kind of a last question. Um, I think historically, right, we've seen a lot of U.S. content being translated or localized for Latin American markets. Do you see a trend now with more Latin American content now being localized for the U.S.? Is that going to be a growing trend, like the show Ugly, for example?
We hope so, Mario. We really hope so. Like we make a lot of efforts here in WBD Latin America to make sure our content can travel to US because we value a lot. We believe in our talent and in our production. Uh, but it's not easy because the Hollywood's very strong, no? And in the end of the day, uh, all platforms, not just Max, all platforms, they have a lot of success with Hollywood's content, no? This is what everyone wants to see. And but we in our productions we try to be very international, not just that they can transmit values to all types of people. In the end of the day, we're trying to do content for people, not a content of a specific country. No, I
Hmm.
think Ugly is a good example that can travel very well. Cidade de Deus is another example that travels is traveling very well. We do have another a new one. That is coming in November, Como Água para Chocolate, based from like a book that we believe that can travel very well. So we always trying to make our talent in Latin America to travel to US, to be watched not just for Americans, but also for our Latino community in United States. So that's our ambition.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. And then I said it was last question, but this makes me think of another question. Are there any countries right now coming out as a leader in terms of production? So you mentioned, of course, Hollywood's number one, but in what's the Hollywood of Latin America right now? Is it in Brazil? Is it in Mexico? Like, where do you see the hot
I,
spot?
I would say that I would say there is Mexico and Brazil, especially Mexico, because Mexico is like today is where you can produce a lot of content in Spanish, no,
Hmm.
and Brazil it is is very strong hub for sure, but there's limitations because of the language. But Mexico is becoming for not just for Max but for all the other platforms is the number one country. Even if you look some syndicator sources where we can find the origin of the each content for Latin America, and Mexico is the number one, and then you
Hmm.
have Brazil number two, and then Colombia it was it is still, but it used to be much stronger, but it's still a hub for production in Argentina as well.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights. It was amazing to talk about your insights into the nuances of Latin America and the U.S. For our listeners that want to learn more about your work, is the best way to connect with you on LinkedIn.
Yes, yes, I'm everywhere. So I'm Doria everywhere. I'm X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. But yeah, you can
Awesome. Yeah. So follow her on all the platforms, and thank you all for tuning into the new mainstream podcast. Everybody, thanks again, Marcela.
thank you so much, Mario. Have a good day.
Thanks to everyone listening in. To get more multicultural insights, check us out at thinknow.com and follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform.